Question: are mass killers mind-controlled assassins? Stay tuned. We're going to talk about it on today's edition of True News. This is True News. I'm Rick Wiles. Two more violent attacks on innocent people have occurred in recent days. A 29-year-old man went on a shooting rampage at a Waffle House restaurant in Nashville on Sunday, killing 4 people. The gunman was captured on Monday. Approximately 30 minutes after the Nashville gunman was apprehended, a man in Toronto, Canada, drove a truck onto a sidewalk and mowed down pedestrians, killing 9. How do we explain the growing number of bizarre mass murders? It isn't about the weapons. Guns, knives, and trucks have been used in numerous mass murder attacks. Is Western society going insane? Are people snapping and losing their minds? Or is there something more sinister happening? Are people being programmed to carry out senseless acts of violence against the public? If yes, who's doing it? And what is the motivation? What is the end game? The subject of mind control assassins has been on the fringe of conspiracy talk for decades. Over my 20 years on radio and television, I conducted thousands of interviews. By far, one of the most knowledgeable and fascinating guests I ever interviewed was the late Gordon Thomas. The Welsh investigative reporter who lived in Ireland wrote numerous books about intelligence agencies. Gordon Thomas wrote 3 books about mind control. In 1989, he published a book titled Journey into Madness: The True Story of Secret CIA Mind Control and Medical Abuse. Minefield was his second book. It was published in 2001. I personally talked to Gordon numerous times about his inside information regarding mind control projects of various intelligence agencies. Several years later, Mr. Thomas called me. He told me that he was encountering problems finding a major publisher willing to print and distribute his 3rd book on mind control projects. He offered the book to me if I would publish it, but our ministry at the time was without the necessary resources to accomplish the task, and we had to turn him down. The 3rd book was eventually printed. It was titled Secrets and Lies: A History of CIA Mind Control and Germ Warfare. It was published in 2007. I am mentioning mind control today because the Washington State Fusion Center, a multi-agency intelligence and law enforcement center, accidentally released old files detailing the mechanisms behind mind control and memory blanking. The files were mixed among documents supplied to a citizen reporter who filed Freedom of Information requests for government documents related to federal surveillance of left-wing and right-wing radicals. Among the documents was a file labeled EM Effects on Human Body, describing the effects of electromagnetic waves. The file revealed techniques to read and control thoughts of humans and to induce pain. Another file contained details about the use of satellites to deliver electromagnetic waves to control human thoughts and behavior. Doc Burkhart and Edward Zoll are here to discuss this story, plus the latest news on the Democrats' national security scandal involving Pakistan and a Russian warning to Israel regarding Syria. Gentlemen, glad to have you back. We talked about this on the last edition of True News, and this file that was mixed in with these other documents, it appears like it's maybe 20, 30 years old, maybe from the 80s, possibly early 90s. But one of the diagrams is a human diagram. The things that it says that they're capable of doing: forced memory blanking and induced erroneous actions. Memory blanking, that you cannot remember anything.
Right.
That could wipe out 15 minutes of your life, 15 days of your life, 15 years of your life. The ability to blank out your memory. Sudden violent itching inside your eyelids.
Which sounds just horrible.
It does. Forced manipulation of airways, including externally controlled forced speech.
That's just wild to even imagine, isn't it?
Making a person say something against their will. That's what they're doing. Wildly racing heart rate without cause. Remotely induced violent rash and itching with preference for hard-to-reach areas during delicate or messy work. What are they doing here with people?
Just torturing them and messing with their minds really is what they're doing.
How about forced nudging of the arm during delicate work causing injury?
Or spills.
Or spills. So somebody's on a ladder and they start nudging, causing a muscle twitch in their arm. Maybe they slip, fall off the ladder. Maybe they drop something. They're on scaffolding.
Or they're driving a car or a truck and they nudge a little bit and then they go off the road.
Lose
and cause
control.
an accident.
Lose control of the vehicle. Controlled dreams. Artificial tinnitus, ringing in the ears.
The one that fascinates me, Rick, is the microwave hearing, because even as we talked about the Waffle House shooter, he has heard voices. And once again, this whole story of all these different shooters hearing voices in their heads. And here
It's
we are.
Voice to skull transmission. Doc, right. I've been talking about voice to skull transmission for 20 years on True News. But years ago, people with this roll, it was, when we were doing radio, I just called it eye roll radio. I knew that when I was talking about these subjects, that some people were just rolling their eyes like, what do you mean, voice to skull transmission? The ability to transmit a human voice at a distance and enter a person's skull.
Yes. And if you think it's crazy, the U.S. Patent Office has a patent on somebody being able to do that. And the Army had a website all the way up till 2008.
This document says the first unclassified successful transmission of the human voice directly into the skull of a living person was performed by Dr. Joseph C. Sharp of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research in 1974 by transforming a hypnotist's voice using the Lowry silent sound or scramble method used in the Gulf War. It is possible to hypnotize a target without the target being aware, from hiding, leaving zero trace evidence. Edward, they used this in the Gulf War. What were they doing in the Gulf War with this technique?
Well, it appears they were potentially taking individuals and affecting their mind, broadcasting propaganda. They were changing the thoughts of whether it be civilians or potentially soldiers on the battlefield. We know there were mass flights of Iraqi soldiers. I'd say over 3/4 of their army actually surrendered without even fighting. Think about that. Is it possible this was used to potentially cause them to run, to flee?
If the Pentagon, if the Defense Department was using mind control and voice-to-skull transmissions in the Gulf War in the 80s, what are they doing to us now in 2018?
Well, you mentioned on Friday, you brought up Stanislav Lunev, the Russian scientist. And I just want to note this.
A Russian spy.
The Russian spy,
the defector.
The highest-ranking Russian defector to the United States. And I did some research on Dr. Joseph C. Sharp, the man you just mentioned. He is indeed a research psychologist. He started at the Walter Reed Army Research Facility in 1961. Interestingly, in 1974, he was part of a joint working group between the United States and Russia, which went to Tashkent, Russia, to do joint research. And what was involved with this was also the director of life sciences at NASA. So this scientist, the one that's claimed in this document released by Washington, a fusion center in Washington, is a man who did joint research with the Russians.
What would be the purpose in joint research with the Russians?
Well, part of the arguments for MK Ultra in America was that we wanted to have the same capabilities that the Russians were developing, that potentially the same capabilities the Nazis were pursuing, which was to either control people, to manipulate actions.
But if we had that ability, why would we share it?
Well, maybe it was a learning event.
Yeah, Doc mentioned people hearing voices, and I've noticed this, Doc, for years. In the very first news reports that come out about a mass shooting, that's when you look for you quickly look at the early reports before the news gets cleaned up.
Right.
And almost always you'll hear or read that the mass shooter heard voices.
So like in the Nashville event with Waffle House, here's a guy that heard voices, he said. And that got me to thinking, well, we just talked about this the other day. But this has gone on for a long time. Tennessee church shooting suspect heard voices, had visions of church before attack. Florida suspect said he heard voices telling him to carry out the massacre. Sister says alleged Walmart shooter has heard voices since his LSD trip in 1988. Appleton man who threatened to shoot up school heard voices. I forgot about this from the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting. The suspect, Esteban Santiago, said he heard voices as well. And then, of course, the infamous Washington Navy Yard shooter heard voices as well. And he went to find those voices. And we actually have a clip from shortly after that occurred that tells a little bit more about the types of voices that he heard.
All right, let's watch it.
Newport police say they responded to the Marriott Hotel early in the morning on August 7th. Aaron Alexis told police he was a naval contractor who traveled often. Alexis told the officer he had a verbal fight with someone at the airport in Virginia as he was getting on a flight to Rhode Island. And that person sent 3 people to follow him and keep him awake by talking to him and sending vibrations into his body. Alexis left a Middletown hotel, went to a Navy base hotel, but still heard the voices. He escaped to a 3rd hotel, the Marriott, but the voices continued. Alexis told the officer the 3 individuals were speaking to him through the floor and using some sort of microwave machine to send vibrations through the ceiling, penetrating his body so he cannot fall asleep.
Now, what's interesting about this gentleman is he actually called authorities beforehand, telling them this is happening to me.
The man, this wasn't a homeless guy that just walked into the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. He had a security clearance. That's how he got in.
Yes.
He came with if I recall, was it a shotgun?
Shotgun.
But he had etched into the shotgun something about MK Ultra, a mind control. He was there trying to find the source of the voices or whatever was generating sounds in his head, and he was going to take him out.
Right.
He was there to stop it. Now, those few people who know about this stuff, they just say, oh, he was nuts, he was crazy. But there's a pattern. And then when you compare it to these old documents that were just accidentally released last week, they line up as being accurate.
Yes.
That our government does conduct. These aren't experiments anymore. This is regular operations. What's the purpose of it?
To control people.
And why? Why do we want mass shooters? Why would the government want mass shooters?
Well, they always gain power out of chaos. And in this case, the mass shootings cause the public to entertain the question of, will I give up my personal liberties to empower the security state, the government, anybody to take my freedom of speech, to take my privacy away? I mean, look at what we have now. We don't have privacy anymore.
It destabilizes society because everybody feels like everything's coming apart. Nothing's secure anymore. Nothing's stable. You never know when somebody's going to go berserk. All right. Look at the security that we have in our own operation because we don't know. Is some weirdo going to walk in the door with a gun?
Right.
So they're doing this to the entire society. They're breaking down the sense of security, of stability. But as Edward says, they're also driving the public to surrender their privacy, surrender their rights, surrender their freedoms. We need the big brother state. We need surveillance cameras. We need spying on people to keep everybody safe.
One other thing that has kind of frightened me about this whole concept, Rick, is that if the government and the military have had this technology and we're able to access documents like this, has this technology gotten out? Has this technology gotten out that some other people are able to use it as well, not just the U.S. government? Maybe other organizations, maybe deep state organizations that have decided that they're going to be proactive in how they're going to manipulate our society and our government?
It's a very valid question. And what other nations have it and are using it against their people and against us? We don't know. I know, going back to Gordon Thomas, who I mentioned, he passed away last year. Fascinating man. And I told Gordon one time, I said, Gordon, I want to be in your will. And he's like paused on the phone. I said, now I don't want any of your money, Gordon. I just want your contact list. All right? Because this man,
some fascinating books.
He knew he had a global network of people in intelligence agencies and the militaries of Great Britain, the United States, Israel, all over the world. They fed him information about various operations that were taking place. But he was a fascinating person. But he educated me about MK Ultra. It was through Gordon Thomas that I learned the most about MK Ultra. MK Ultra was from what we know, the first mind control project of the U.S. government, the CIA back in the 1950s. Now, the CIA just came into existence after World War II.
Right.
So right away they got into mind control. Where did they get this? My guess is the Nazis.
Yes.
Because the CIA brought thousands, tens of thousands of Nazis, scientists, to the United States. And so the U.S. was developing a mind control operation called MK Ultra. Well, I grew up in Maryland, and nearby was Fort Detrick, which is the home of our biological chemical warfare program that we don't have.
Right. Where
we don't produce Novichok and all that kind of stuff. But Fort Detrick was being used by the CIA for mind control. And there was a scientist there who was involved in the U.S. biological warfare program. And apparently, he was concerned that biological warfare agents were used in the Korean War.
Right.
And he started to get queasy about it and wanted out. Well, the CIA doused him, and I don't know what that means, being doused with LSD, because it was the CIA that invented LSD. It wasn't Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s guru. It was
he was the salesman.
Yeah, the CIA invented LSD. So they somehow covered Dr. Olson with LSD. And this happened up in the mountains of western Maryland. And then they took him to New York City to see the in-house psychiatrist, the CIA-appointed psychiatrist. And while he was being treated, this is the official story, Dr. Olson went berserk, ran through the window of a high-story building in New York City and fell to his death.
So they involuntarily drugged him, kidnapped him, and then he died while he was in their custody.
Yes. But they said it was an accident.
Suicide.
Suicide. Yeah, that's the official story was suicide. So his family never believed it.
Right.
And then in the 1970s, during the administration of Gerald Ford, the truth came out. The U.S. This was during the Church hearing, the hearing by Senator Frank Church of Idaho, and a lot of stuff came out about the CIA, and some truth came out about Dr. Olson's death. And Gerald Ford and the U.S. government made a settlement with the Olson family and gave them a little bit of money and
about
apologized.
$500,000.
And apologized, all right, for making Mr. Olson jump out a window and commit suicide.
So that means that they had established the fact that it was the U.S. government's fault. I'm surprised they even admitted to that.
I know. So now there's a movie out about Frank Olson.
It's on Netflix, Wormwood. So they're trying to now bring light to what had happened to him through a theatrical display of it. And there's been a couple of books that have also been written about this, Rick, but the thing that hasn't been addressed is the very things were brought up during the Senate church hearings are supposedly no longer happening. The CIA promised post-church hearings they would stop, they would reform. They no longer would break their own charter, which was to not turn their own mechanisms, their own capabilities against the American people, which they admitted to doing during the time period between World War II and 1968.
They always, when they get called, they always say, yes, that's back then we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just kind of messing around.
Right.
But we won't do that anymore. It's like the Pentagon with doing biological chemical warfare experiments on U.S. soldiers. Yeah, we did that, but we didn't know how dangerous it was. We would never do that again.
Right.
Sure. What are you doing to us right now? Well, one story that involves possible MK Ultra programming was the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy.
Right.
You know the official story. Sirhan, a Palestinian man, shot Senator Kennedy in the Ambassador Hotel in June of, what was it, 1968, during the California primary.
Well, he had already won the primary.
He had won the primary. I remember, as a kid that night, watching TV and the announcement that Senator Kennedy had been shot. So the official story was that this young Palestinian man, Sirhan, was the lone assassin. Well, many years later, Mr. Sirhan, who he was sentenced actually to be executed, but that decision was overturned. He's serving a life sentence. He's still in prison today. So he filed a motion, his lawyer filed a motion in court in California claiming that he was an MK Ultra mind-controlled assassin. Now this story came out, I'm thinking 15 years ago.
Right.
Then some other things came out. A recording surfaced, and CNN obtained the recording, and firearms experts, ballistic experts, said without a doubt there were more than 8 shots fired in the hotel.
Why is that important?
Because it meant that there was more than one gunman.
Right, because he only had 8 shots in his pistol, right?
But also, while Sirhan was shooting, and there's no doubt that he shot the gun, but there was another waiter in the kitchen who grabbed his wrist and was struggling with him, trying to get the gun from him. Now, a lot of the bullets went into the walls of the kitchen, and that's why the hotel was demolished, so there can be no evidence. Well, then the BBC published, they did a special report a number of years ago. 2006, in which they identified 3 high-level CIA officers who were in the hotel, in the same room, in the kitchen, in the pantry, when Senator Kennedy was shot.
Right.
They identified them. Pictures, names, all 3 standing in the hotel kitchen as Kennedy was shot.
Now, the crazy thing
What's the explanation for that?
Well, they were part of the Southeast Bureau for the CIA, and this was around the same time that the CIA, admittedly through the church hearings, was running an anti-war cleansing of the country. They're going after activists, leaders, anyone, including Martin Luther King Jr. Well, the funny thing about Mr. Kennedy was he was running on an anti-war ticket. If he had come forward, he would have pulled America out of Vietnam and probably would have made sure we didn't go to any further wars.
Well, there's another connection. These 3 CIA officers were connected to the Bay of Pigs. All right. And so it fuels that speculation that there was animosity in the Bureau against the Kennedys for what happened in the Bay of Pigs operation. But the bottom line is this. Sirhan's lawyer is claiming that his client was programmed by the CIA to be there at the time to pull a gun out and shoot, but he was the patsy, he was the fall guy. The real assassins were brought in and then escorted out of the hotel. Now, how many times, if this stuff is happening, how many assassinations have taken place and the wrong person is in prison?
Well, it's interesting. Another part to this, Bobby Kennedy sent away his bodyguards. This reminds me directly of what happened to Antonin Scalia, the Supreme Court Justice.
Do you remember who was his bodyguard that night? Rosie Greer.
Really?
Rosie Greer, football player, unarmed, was his bodyguard. He did not have his official bodyguards with him. You're right. But Rosie Greer, and there was another, I forget, there was another football player who was with Rosie. So Kennedy was without protection that night.
Are there other aspects of Sirhan that kind of give you a clue that maybe there was some mind control operating there?
There's a 15-day gap in his memory that no psychiatrist, no hypnotist, no one has been able to penetrate this wall in Sirhan. He's been questioned. He's been, I don't know what techniques that they've used, but the police said that they could not get past this wall that was in his mind, that he had meticulous memory of all of his previous life except a 15-day window, which his lawyer claims that is when he was programmed. That's when he was hypnotized and made an MK Ultra assassin.
You mean like forced memory blanking, like we talked about
earlier? Like forced memory blanking.
Wow.
Exactly. It's right there in the document, forced memory blanking. You can't say, well, it's a conspiracy theory. We can't make people lose their memory. Right there it is.
Conspiracy fact.
It's a conspiracy fact. Forced memory blanking. Hey, well, listen, there's a lot of other stuff. We're down. We have a minute left. Folks, we're going to 2 hours, May 7th. All right, get ready for it. True News expands to 2 hours on May 7th. There's a lot of other stuff I wanted to talk to you about today. The Russians, unnamed source, made a threat against Israel. Russia is supplying Syria with their S-300 surface-to-air missile batteries, which would shoot down warplanes and incoming missiles. The Israelis said a week ago, it's a threat to us. We're going to take it out. Well, why is it a threat? It can't fire missiles into Israel. It shoots down planes that are bombing Israel. That's why it's a threat. So Israel, an Israeli defense official said, we're going to take it out.
And Russia said?
And a Russian official said there will be dire consequences because the Russians are going to be there installing it. This is an expensive Russian defense operation. And if the Israelis bomb this Russian air defense system, who knows what Moscow's going to do. Hey, there's our closing notice. We got to go. Come back tomorrow, True News. We love you. We'll see you on tomorrow's edition.